Next, I'd like to ask to come on to stage is Manila Austin. She's the VP of Research at C-Space, and she's going to be talking a little bit about linking customer centricity to the investments.
Thank you. I'm going to figure out if this thing works, first of all. Oh, no, okay, well, okay. So thank you very much for that. So I've got a bunch of parts of my presentation. There's a lot of slides, so I'm going to try to keep my eye on the timer, and there's a case example at the end, which I'm going to jump to if I get stuck. So I'm going to talk a little bit and give you a fun quiz on sort of why growth is so important and so elusive today. I'm going to share some of the research we did that tries to link customer-centric companies to business results. And then I'm going to share a client example, and hopefully there'll be some time for questions. So, there's a lot of surveys that come out, at the beginning of every year, and they do this in business and survey executives. And this year, growth was the #1 thing for CEOs. Talent was important, technology was important, the competition, all these things are also on their minds, but growth is one of the primary things, and it's really, really elusive. This is a quote from the CEO of IBM. And she's talking about actually reorienting an organization to be closer to the customer. So, conventional wisdom and sort of as we've been talking a lot about today, the customer centricity is sort of the hope that if we can do this, that's going to help find new paths to growth. But it's challenging, and we do need some help, some proof to think about sort of what actually works and what doesn't. So, to sort of set the table and sort of say, where are we with this effort? And I'll try to get the clicker right because it kind of spoils it when you give the answer ahead of the quiz. So Bain did a study a bunch of years ago asking how many people, companies, and then also consumers thought companies were customer-centric. Was it 8%? Was it 78%? It's actually only 8% of customers actually think companies are being customer-centric, yet 80% of companies actually think that they are. So that's a pretty big gap. I don't know if any of you know the Big Shift study from Deloitte, but I think it's really, really interesting. And what they did is they actually looked at the U.S. economy from the last, I think, since 1965, and they did, they could have either found that it declined, that it was declining and now is on an upswing, or it's been slowly increasing. And this is the return on asset. It turns out that return on assets, so that's sort of like how much companies actually are efficiently using all the investment they put into the business, is actually declining, and it's been declining steadily, and if it keeps going at the rate it is, will be absolutely flat by the year 2025. So in terms of, when you think about the way companies conduct business, the old models are no longer working, which is one of the reasons why growth is so challenging. And when you think about how this translates into advertising spend and sort of, the budgets that we spend actually getting closer to customers, how much, and there's probably a lot of people here in consumer insights, when you think about what companies spend on advertising versus what they spend on actually understanding their customers, however that is it $7 to the one, 14, 28? It is 14. So when you think about what a company would spend on a Super Bowl ad in a given year, is often an entire year of an insights budget. And lastly, when you think about the nature of innovation and where companies invest, is it more about process efficiencies or sort of breakthrough market expanding and market growing innovations? This comes from a fellow named Clay Christensen, who I think is from Harvard. He writes a lot about innovation. It's actually most of all of our R&D efforts are spent on basically making things more efficient. And these, when you think about what that really looks like, that usually means shipping jobs somewhere else. It means cutting. It means actually kind of shrinking the workforce instead of growing it. We actually need to be closer to customers and actually work with them differently to find new ways to get to growth more than ever. So I think what some of these points are trying to make is that companies are now not in a position, you can't just spend your way to get growth. If you just spend money on advertising, it's not necessarily going to generate the same kind of returns that it used to. Our position and my position and sort of the focus and the point of this research is to demonstrate that companies that actually can figure out to harness the power of customers, and rethink the role of the customer in the organization. So not just understanding them to sell them more things, but actually invite them into your processes as a partner. These companies actually can become truly customer-centric, and those things lead to growth. So the philosophy here is that systematically designing the customer into the business can sustain and grow the business. When you think about how companies operate, usually customers are sort of relegated to part of the organization. Sometimes it's insights, it might be other parts, or perhaps these little red dots would be sprinkled out, but they're not necessarily connected, and they're not necessarily at the heart of the business. So when you think about designing a customer into your business, think about how you can partner with them to understand your operations or to improve or change your operations, your strategy and all your business processes. That's what we tried to understand in this research, and what we came up with is that companies that feel customer-centric to customers themselves. So if you ask a customer, what would a customer-centric company feel like to you? It turns out that these are the things that customers think are important to them. Amazing customer experience, delivering specific emotional rewards, and that's not the same thing as like satisfaction or sentiment. It means feeling smart to be a customer. It means feeling proud to be a customer. It's creating a sense of belonging with the brand. They want companies to be open and to be authentic. They want them to show empathy, have really good intuition, and even anticipating their needs, and they want them to be relevant and not just even on a bigger scale in terms of relevant values and something quite large like that. So these are the behaviors we uncovered through doing the research. And what we found is when we looked is that those behaviors were related to better performance, at least in publicly traded companies. What's next? Okay. These are a real top-line version of results. Like the full research report is available, and I'm happy to give you the reference for that. But we found that companies that really get customers, and again, this is from the customer's point of view, have better revenue performance. They show a higher return on asset than their competition, and they are also more likely to have been recommended. So let me just pause for a second so you understand the methodology. What we did is we had probably 25 or 30 items that were generated through a bunch of qualitative research, thinking about, as well as looking at the customer experience literature, the customer centricity literature, the customer satisfaction literature. So we kind of posited, okay, what would a customer-centric company feel like to consumers? And we tested that, and then we did some reliability and validity testing. And when we were ready, we went out about probably just over a year ago to 15,000 US consumers. And we asked them to have in mind a company that really got them, had good intuition, and then to rate that company along these dimensions. And then we asked them to think of a company that really didn't get them and to rate them on the same amount of items. So the scores that we used are a composite of those things. And I'm happy to go into detail, not right now, because I'm not sure this timer is actually working, but after the session, that's fine. We also then took all those scores, and for every company that was publicly traded, we looked for a relationship between higher scores and better performance. And I performed a very simple correlational analysis, because that's the extent. My PhD is in psychology, not in data analytics. So we did find the relationship with 3 separate samples. So we did replicate it 3 times. Since then, we've been working with the data analysts to do some other stuff, and I'll share those results as well. And we've actually just finished collecting the 2016 data, so hopefully we will have that soon. But the nature of the questions we asked, we really did try to take familiar questions where the company lens is just sort of embedded in them. How was your experience with me? Are you satisfied with me? Will you recommend me? Are you going to keep purchasing from me? And try to just insert that customer lens back into them. So do you really get me? Are you going to do what you say what you're going to do? Do you share my values? Do I feel smart and proud and things like that? So they're just a little bit more customer-centric ways of getting at some of the questions we've always asked. And when you look at how companies perform and what sort of this means, and we call our measure the customer quotient. So any references to CQ, that's what this is. So customers were 5 times as likely to say that Amazon gets me compared to Walmart, 4 times as likely to say that Panera gets me over McDonald's, and 5.5 times as likely to say JetBlue gets me over United Airlines. And you can see that there's a commensurate balance in sort of how they act, those companies perform that have better intuition. So one of the things we did build out a statistical model, and the questions that we kept are things that predict either loyalty or advocacy. But when we looked at sort of what contributes to a CQ score and what 1 point in CQ actually gets you in terms of a dollar amount, right? It turns out it's a 0.5 percentage point in ROA, and I'm like, well, that's great. What's that? But when you do the math, and if you actually go into Morningstar or Yahoo Finance, you can do the calculation. It's not that tricky to figure out that that little bit of increase in ROA actually can result in millions or even billions of dollars, depending on what the company's total assets are. And so that's the data. And there's plenty more, but that's a real high-level overview. What I want to do now is talk about one example of how we're actually using some of this with clients. So I'm not going to name the client just because I don't have permission, but it's a technology company and an electronics company. So one of the first things we did is we shared some of this information, but in a little more detail with them for their industry to kind of get them interested. So this is our main client, and she was excited. And she wanted to use it to get her executives excited. So what we did is we actually surveyed. She has a couple different communities with us because that's part of what we do, online communities, and we also do offline work. But so we fielded those questions to community members for her brand and 2 competitive brands. And then we also surveyed employees, this big engineering technology kind of company. And we wanted to know from the engineers and everybody else that worked at that company if they thought, customers thought that the company had good intuition, right? So the essence of these kind of analyses are a gap analysis. And what we found, we put it onto a spider chart, which I'll talk you through it. So the green and the red lines are how consumers see the competing brands. So this brand, our client, they're still ahead of the competition based on what community members said who are familiar with the brand, but we also used a different community to get some different perspectives. Okay, so that's where they see the brand performing, consumers. And this was pretty consistent with a bunch of different age groups. When we asked employees how they thought consumers would rate their brand, it was pretty low. I mean, particularly around this idea of empathy and openness. They expected that consumers were getting a lot of emotional rewards from the brand, but in the other dimensions, not so much. So that was very surprising to our client. And then when we asked how employees themselves saw the brand, they imagined that the customer experience was amazing, at least relatively speaking, and that the other dimensions would be low. So this was troubling because the disconnect between sort of how employees saw their relationship to customers and how customers actually saw the brand was quite dramatic, right? So when we think about what the consumers really wanted, and there was a lot of qualitative we did too to flesh this out, but they were really looking for the brand to be more open, to continue developing relevant products, and make the loyalty program or the loyalty efforts relevant to them as well. Employees also wanted the company to be more open. They wanted to feel closer. They wanted to feel like a better connection to the customer. And so we also helped sort of drive this home by actually quantifying some of what, if the brand did move, what would that look like? So we did that by doing the ROA calculation, and we also did it by extrapolating, if they reached this new audience, if they were more open, if they could sell 1 or more of these units, for a year, what would that look like? So we really built in some financial analysis and like back of the napkin, we weren't making any promises, but we wanted to put teeth into it. And then we proposed specific actions. Right, so this is how the client used it. So she took this data and our report, and we worked very collaboratively, and she's a great designer herself, so it looked really fabulous. And she used it to talk to her chief executive officer, the chief brand officer, as well as the chief digital strategy officer, and sharing sort of the disconnect and sort of where employees really were. There's a lot of literature that links employee engagement to customer-centric companies, so I would imagine that if we had given them an engagement survey, it also would be low. But that was definitely alarming for the executives, and it led to a bunch of other work. an internal customer confidence workshop. So this is over 500 employees. It was a physical installation derived from online community members as well as other consumers to actually get them to experience the customer, to feel closer to the customer, and also to show that the company was actually being open, because openness was a real issue. They actually revised their 360 process so that there's a customer experience piece for like the 10,000 employees that work there. They held and are holding town hall meetings with the 300 top executives, and they're building, so these two bullets down there, the customer-inspired retail store and the fuzzy front end work, that represents building the customer and bringing the customer voice to groups that the insights department didn't typically serve historically. So it's creating new audiences. So when I talk to our clients and why is this working, how is this working, what's not working, these are the things that she really hit upon. It was a database wake-up call for executives. It gave executives a framework and a way to talk about their strategy in relation to customers in a way that was a lot more integrated than it had been before. And it gives them confidence too, because they saw that linkage between those dimensions and potential results, that they know if they focus on openness, if they focus on empathy, whatever that means for their brand, there's a likelihood that it's gonna actually lead to something. They link, they're actually being able to link insights to specific actions so that they can track results and tell a story internally about that more successfully. The client team, our client's team has gained in sort of their political power in the organization, to put that's kind of crass, but it's true. And just in general, opening up a two-way dialogue, not only between the customers and the brand, but within the brand in different executives. So I'm going to stop there. It says 2:40. I don't know what I've got. This is sort of a way to start doing this work by building relationships and then socializing that through like those immersion events that I described and finally designing it in, but I'll just pause there. Are there any questions? I talk pretty fast.
Any questions from the audience? Here he goes.
I guess it's maybe just a comment. It's more of a comment.
Okay.
You compared Walmart to Amazon, and I don't think they're really comparable because one's online, one's big box. And even the second one, which I don't remember, now JetBlue and American maybe is close, but
JetBlue United.
but with Walmart, did you do something that might be more comparative for like Walmart versus Target?
That's very interesting. We could do that. I don't have that information in front of me. Some people feel like Walmart and Amazon are a great comparison. Other people feel like they're really not. Walmart's really trying to get onto the online business, and they hold Amazon up as like an industry standard and benchmark. So for that reason, it's effective. But I agree, they're very different business models, and so it depends on who you are if you like that example or not.
Oh, I think we have one more question in the back.
Yeah, I just had a question with regard to how you determined that 1 point in your CQ rating equaled 0.5% increase in revenue.
Right, that's a really great question. So, and I didn't do that math myself. We have an analyst that did it, but essentially we have a model that looks at how all the different things contribute to CQ, and we also have the metrics for the business performance metrics. So it was a matter of just sort of looking at the right coefficient and getting sort of what were they. So my understanding is that is the coefficient. So it was based on statistical analysis and some modeling, some sophisticated modeling.
All right. Thank you very much. Chris. Thank you very much.
Oops. Here.
You can lay it there.
There you go. Thanks.
See you now.